Quad nods, panos, 4eyes, whatever name you know them by. These goggles have become a cultural icon. A character donning a pair of quads tells us more about their lethality and tactical experience than entire minutes of exposition.
Keep up, so.
However, these goggles may have found a home in Tier 1 ground ops, but they didn't start there. What are their origins? Which depictions in media get them right and which get them wrong? What brought them their legendary status as the fighter jet of tactical eyewear? And are 4 eyes really better than 2? This is the L3 Harris GPNVG Comprehensive. In 1975, the U.S. Army Aviation Center in Dale County, Alabama, kicked off the NVG program, receiving 4 pairs of AN/PVS-5 goggles. In order to understand variations on night vision technology, we'll take a minute crash course. In simplest terms, image intensifier tubes work by taking in visible spectrum light, using it to excite electrons, amplifying these electrons through a series of intensifying channels, and catching them on a screen of phosphor. The end result, the original visible light is viewable as intensified visible light, making dark areas easier to discern. An extensive 1993 survey found that increased FOV, or field of view, was the #1 enhancement air crews needed out of night vision devices, closely followed by resolution. And in the mid-1990s, a new program was birthed, the mission to create a PNVG, or panoramic night vision goggle. This challenge came with an inherent problem. Increasing FOV could only happen at the expense of resolution. Because each tube has a fixed number of pixels or picture elements, when spread over a larger field of view, the angular subtents per pixel increases, meaning the larger the FOV, the lower the resolution. A trade-off that pilots were very specifically not willing to make. The solution was found in the PNVG's eventual design. Rather than increase the size of the tubes, 4 tubes were integrated, with the 2 center goggles producing the standard 40 degrees, and the 2 left and right channels creating a 30-degree increase each. The user's effective field of view now increased by 160%, taking NVGs from a standard monocular 40 to a panoramic 100 degrees. Early concepts were integrated into pilots' helmets within the heads-up display, and were extremely low profile to allow a pilot to retain the PNVG upon ejection. The initial goal had been achieved. The concept of a PNVG had become a reality. The question now was, would it work? In 1998, concept designs of the PNVG had been shipped and tested. The results were clear. Engineered for balance and comfort, and using the same tubes as currently fielded NVGs, the visual accuracy, gains, and weight distribution of PNVGs were at least comparable to standard F4949 goggles. Of course, in the key metric, field of view, they outshone every competition. Designated ANVIS 10, they were put into production, and crews of the AC-130 gunship, A-10 Thunderbolt, MC-130 Combat Talon, and C-17 Globemaster all eventually fielded ANVIS 10. In the air, the advantage of PNVGs were deemed worthy of their few drawbacks. But how would they perform on the ground? A trial in March to April 2002 took place at Fort Benning, Georgia, with the objective: analyze just how big a part field of view plays in a shooter's ability to acquire and eliminate targets. The results were actually unexpected. There appeared to be little to no improvement in target detection times between standard 40-degree goggles and the new 95-degree panos. What the panos did improve was the number of targets the participants were able to detect, especially those at close range. These tests in retrospect failed in one key issue, what I'll call the peripheral vision problem. Human vision is broken into several parts. Foveal vision, the area of your vision you use to focus. Look directly at an object, and your vision and mental attention will be focused on said object, and everything to the sides will sort of fade into obscurity. Peripheral vision is most useful for detecting movement or noticing changes in contrast. Our eyes have evolved to see a predator moving quickly in the underbrush, or notice a camouflage threat even out of the corner of our eye. This 2002 trial used static, low-contrast targets with no engagement cues, features that are incompatible with peripheral vision, the one part of our vision that the PNVG was designed to improve. Hence, why target detection times were essentially the same between 40 and 90-degree nods, but in every case, more targets were found by the shooters wearing those panoramic NVGs. Essentially, this test, while flawed, proved that panos weren't necessarily beneficial in every ground operation scenario. It proved that they were beneficial in one key use case. A use case which in the early 2000s was growing more and more recognized as a tactical necessity: room clearing. As early as 2005, we have evidence of special operations groups fielding the Anvis 10 on deployments. But while Anvis 10 was viable on the ground, it wasn't made for it. It was finicky, difficult to customize, and wasn't designed with the ruggedness required of a true ground application NVG. Its successor, the GPNVG, was. While its development and production is still shrouded from civilian eyes as it is still being made to this day, we can only gather that every problem with Anvis 10 was studied and ironed out by L3 Warrior Systems. Gone was the low profile needed for aircraft ejection, and introduced was a rugged, fully modular system with better performance in extreme temperatures and maintenance and customization in mind. While its existence wasn't entirely hidden, most members of the public came in contact with the GPNVG through the December 2012 film Zero Dark 30.
Khalid!
Released just barely a year and a half after the operation itself, it is probably the first depiction of an actual event in which the GPNVG was definitively used. The film made a permanent impression upon audiences, and firmly set in stone a new visual and tonal depiction of American Special Operations personnel and tactics in a way comparable to depictions of Delta Force in 2001's Black Hawk Down. It's no surprise that they continue to hold a place of significance aesthetically. Surprisingly, while Zero Dark 30 certainly cemented the quad nods into mainstream audiences' heads, it was not actually their first media depiction. 2012's Medal of Honor Warfighter, released 2 months before Zero Dark 30, depicts characters using GPNVGs in several instances. The game relied heavily on direct input from several active duty Navy SEALs, including one of the members of DevGru or SEAL Team 6, involved in the aforementioned Neptune Spear, and its entire visual style reflects this attention to detail heavily. Fascinatingly, several Navy SEALs were reprimanded and punished for leaking classified Navy information to the developers of Warfighter. It's possible that the proliferation of tech like the GPNVG in the modern US military was one of these details.
Operators used to be limited to a narrow field of view. Now with near full field of view night vision, we can fight at night the same way we would during the day.
However, Warfighter was stuck in an uncomfortable position, lacking the visual or tonal cohesion of the previous year's Battlefield 3, and released just 1 month before the highly anticipated Call of Duty Black Ops 2, Warfighter failed to find a niche and was quickly forgotten by most, as well as its surprisingly forward-thinking aesthetic notes. While panos have become synonymous with the going dark tactical aesthetics of the 20-teens Call of Duty Modern Warfare series revival, they actually made their first appearance in 2013's Call of Duty Ghosts, a title at the time hated by many for its tonal departure from the beloved Modern Warfare franchise, but which actually depicted military technology more accurately in many instances, at least visually. While Ghosts contains the only accurate model of GPNVGs in the Call of Duty franchise, they exist in the game as a purely aesthetic tacked-on addition. Ghosts, in many ways one of the unappreciated godfathers of the tactical aesthetic, does this in almost every instance, very accurately modeling real military tech being used and presented in entirely inaccurate, over-the-top Hollywood scenarios. 6 years and Call of Duty titles later, and Modern Warfare 2019's Clean House mission made waves in the shooter community. Clearly influenced by Zero Dark 30, the mission forced players for the first time in the series into a confined target-rich space, where enemies or non-combatants could be around any small corner, through closed doors, under beds, or behind hostages. While visually striking, the mission actually doesn't depict GPNVGs at all. The model is wrong. The visual effects on screen don't accurately reflect third-generation green or white phosphor tubes either, but again, these are some sci-fi quad tubes, not GPNVGs. Clean House was, however, for all intents and purposes, the first curated sequence in modern FPS gaming in which characters used quad nods in the exact situation that they are designed for. The Call of Duty franchise continues to show characters wearing GPNVGs or made-up quad-tube NVGs, but aside from certain sequences that directly echo Zero Dark 30, without designing their depictions in ways which match their real-life use case. Media, whether games or otherwise, repeatedly falls into this trap, creating characters wearing or using the famous nods, but in scenarios that don't make sense for their use, in brightly lit environments, or perhaps in wide open spaces. Oftentimes, the GPNVGs are modified, given more tubes or maybe cameras or illuminators, taking that tactical strangeness to the maximum. Besides Zero Dark 30, as far as live-action media goes, the short film SCP Dollhouse is one of the few pieces of media depicting GPNVGs being used in the environment they are most accustomed for, an extremely tight and hostile space. The short gets points from me as well for two reasons: actually depicting the operators activating and deactivating their goggles depending on the surrounding light level, and presenting actual deep darkness requiring the use of nods in the first place.
Target is no longer present.
Two games attempt to specifically depict GPNVGs in a realistic manner. 2018's Ground Branch is most successful in depicting two aspects: the variations on the goggle and the differences between it and other devices. Ground Branch is the only game which allows players to choose between the real variations of GPNVGs, either black or tan housing, and between green and white phosphor lenses. Green-colored phosphor was most common in Gen 3 tubes for many years, because green is the wavelength our eyes are most sensitive to in low-light environments. White phosphor is both easier on the eyes and aids in target acquisition. Human eyes, it seems, actually have an easier time detecting contrast and color on the black and white than the green wavelength. Ground Branch is also the only game to attempt a depiction of the view through a pair of quad nods, the center monocular 40 degrees of the two center tubes, and the binocular 30 on both sides. Because of the game's map and encounter design, it accurately depicts the use case for GPNVGs as well. When you're in a pitch black, tight, and visually complex environment, where detecting slight movements in the peripheral could mean life or death, having those extra tubes is everything. Top.
Good shot.
AI in this game detect light in the visible spectrum, meaning that they will be alerted by white light or visible lasers. An NV user will thusly be able to observe or sight them without being noticed. Being able to detect a threat can be as important as not letting the threat detect you first. The game is also one of the few which attempts to depict the drawbacks of using nods. Magnified optics are rendered useless, for example. Ground Branch is, however, like every other game I've mentioned, a game wherein one is simply given or can choose to wear GPNVGs. Only one game depicts an important aspect of quads in real life: their prohibitively high cost. A pair of GPNVGs on the civilian market will run you over $40,000 US. Even knockoffs, custom kits, or newly arising competitor quads will be impossible to acquire for under 5 figures at bare minimum, often just for the housing itself. Escape from Tarkov, released in 2016, is the only game in which the GPNVG is both the highest quality image intensifier and the most expensive. Because you're competing with other human beings rather than just AI in Tarkov, having 95 degrees of night vision provides a significant advantage in night combat. While the game doesn't add the on-screen visual effect of the 4 tubes, the maximum field of view in Escape from Tarkov is 95 degrees, so the GPNVGs filling your screen with night vision is technically correct. There are 2 issues with Tarkov's depiction, however. They aren't expensive enough for the game's setting, around $1,200 USD instead of over $40, meaning that they appear quite commonly on skilled players. More importantly, they don't limit the player's use of long-range optics, scopes, and LPVOs. Since low FOV nods in Tarkov, including those which only cover one eye, such as the ubiquitous PVS-14, cover the screen with black, the GPNVGs are the only nods in Tarkov which give the player full FOV while wearing night vision. Rather than a specific tool for short-range engagements, the nods become a straight buff to nighttime ops in every case.
I see him on the road. He's dead. Killed him.
If games in the future want to depict GPNVGs as accurately as possible, meshing the approaches these 2 games take, as well as a more accurate depiction of night vision in general, would be the answer. Accurately depict the visual effects of quad-tube night vision, the overlapping FOVs, the inability to use ranged optics, as well as in games of the player economy, the unbelievably high price tag. If GPNVGs provided a huge advantage replicating their actual intended use case rather than simple aesthetics, and were so rare that getting your hands on one felt like an endgame moment, that'd increase their cool factor more than the visual effect ever could. Cool factor might be the most important thing. GPNVGs are the holy grail of night vision tech, not because they're the most rounded out device, the one with the most features, the most widely used, or even the newest or most advanced. They're famous because they feel important. Their rarity, their complexity, is what makes them so instantly recognizable. They're a scalpel, a curated tool for a specific application. Humanity has always had a fundamental, primal fear of the dark. GPNVGs give us the one advantage that we lack in nature, turning a human being into the closest thing to an apex predator. When you need to be deadly and aware, when danger could lurk around any corner, when cost is of no object, when you need to be the best, you had better bring the best. The GPNVG. You know them when you see them, but they might have seen you first. I hope you learned something, and subscribe if you haven't. I'll catch you soon.